welcome to the start of our new season. Glad to see so many people and some new faces as always from us. I'm also president of Atomic Object. Atomic Object lives upstairs, where we do software for other big companies mostly, some small ones too. But been doing Agile since 2000, early 2000, and started XPwm Michigan about 3 years ago. I'm going to introduce some board members. We have a few board members here, although actually not so many today. We actually had elections for new board members, and we elected Tessa Welch, who is here somewhere, Tessa, from Priority Health, and Paul Vanderlei from IBM. I'll let you see Paul. I think you can take it tonight. Paul Jorgensen, who's here from Grand Valley State. And then continuing on the board is me and Willie DeSoto at Smiths and Dave Limbaugh from Priority Health. Dave was supposed to be at our panel tonight and unfortunately had a personal family emergency that took him away, so we won't be able to tap him, unfortunately. Important stuff to do, thanks to sponsors. The fact that we can have this gathering and no one has to pay to do it, and that we can have snacks and whatnot and a space to meet in, is thanks to the fact that we have corporate sponsors. Atomic Object is a sponsor, Priority Health, X-Rite, Core Machinery sponsors. We're in that season of looking for new sponsors to fill the money buckets back up so we can continue to do this for a few more years. So if you have any suggestions or leads on people who would be would take a kindly to a sponsor pitch, I'd appreciate knowing them and I'd like to approach them. We have some upcoming meetings already settled, which is a very nice feeling. In October, we're sponsoring a conference, so that's worthy enough if I got to say a little bit more. I'm going to skip over that one right now. In November, it's not the fourth Tuesday, because I think that's very close to Thanksgiving. It's going to be the following Tuesday. We're going to have Chad Fowler here. And Chad Fowler is author of several books. He just had a book come out called something about Ruby and Rails.
Rails Recipes.
Rails Recipes, yes, thank you. That was just published. He also published a book called My Software Development Job Went to India and All I Got Was This Lousy Book. Practical things you can do to protect your job as an IT professional. So several of us at Atomic have heard him speak at conferences, and he's an interesting person. We're really lucky to get him to come. And then in January, we have Mark Salmango from the U.S. Army Research Department or Division or Unit or whatever. I don't know what the official organizational level is. But basically, he's going to be talking about doing Agile in the Army, which sounds about as un-Agile as you can get, right? But if you look on the site, it's a very interesting thing because he talks about how, at the smallest unit, a group of people, soldiers, that's a very agile unit. And then you go all the way up to the top of the Army, and it's very bureaucratic and heavy and slow-moving and full of inertia. So he talked about using the principles that the Army values, courage, and pride, and work, and responsibility, to help him get Agile software development principles into the organization, which I thought was really interesting. And, rumor has it, he's going to be driving this amazing vehicle over here, which was the output of one of his projects. So that should be a fun little show and tell event. So that's January. And then we're still working on spring meetings, but we got a bunch of exciting ideas that I think will be fun to hear. Okay, so October is the Great Lakes Software Excellence Conference. This is going to be at Calvin College. If you haven't heard about it, I've talked about it several times. So if you're a regular here, you probably heard me talk about this. Registration's been open for a couple of months now. Registration is going pretty well. We could always use more people signing up. That'd be good. We have over 20 speakers coming to talk, including people like Tim Lister, PeopleWare author and consultant and general thought leader in the industry. We have a bunch of other people, 19 other people at least, who are coming from all over the country, including some guy coming from Australia to speak. Going on. A wide variety of topics. We're organized into tracks of process, development, and quality/testing. And you'll be able to hop around between tracks, so it's not like you're committed. So it's a great chance, very economical, a few $100s to register, a very economical opportunity. We also have tutorials happening the day before the official conference, which you can register for on the conference website as well. And tutorials are, there's a TDD tutorial in the morning. James Scoville from Menlo Interactive down in Ann Arbor, a company very much like Atomic Object in age and Agile principle use, is doing a non-computer-based TDD tutorial. It should be quite interesting to see. principles of test-driven development. And then in the afternoon, Scott Miller, one of our developers, is following that up with a hands-on C#.NET TDD tutorial. So you'll come out of there with tools on your laptop and some practical experience in using NUnit and some mocking library and building an application and doing test automation. And then the other tutorial is a process tutorial. Tim Lister is doing one side, and I'm afraid I can't remember quite what the other one is, but it's on our website. glsec.org. Last little administrative thing, the bathroom is right here. If you are interested in seeing upstairs, just grab an atomic person. As it turns out, this whole table is full of atomic people, and there's a few more in the audience, and we're happy to give tours and show you our stuff. We have added a few little things if you've been there before and just want to see how the atomic office is growing. Okay, with it, I guess I'd be happy to take any questions of an administrative nature or just general questions before we start our topic tonight. Anything you want to bring up? Yep. So, this is very loosely organized, and I'm going to roughly sort of moderate. I know what everyone has in mind that they'd like to share, but the most interesting thing that happened last year was the conversation that we got going. So I strong-armed these guys into picking what they thought was the most interesting thing they learned from the conference, just to share that to get the conversation going. But as I say, the really fun part is everybody being able to ask questions and talk and share experiences. So these pictures, by the way, are all slides from the conference. Give you that sort of, like you were there feeling. So let's start. I'm going to talk a little bit about two things, two of the keynotes I heard. Okay, so a couple of vital stats. 1,111 people attended. This is substantially over what it was last year, 60% over. Representing 29 countries, and the paper acceptance rate, experience reports, research reports, etc., was underneath 30%. So that's cool because we have paper there. I'm bragging, I admit. But it's become very selective, and there's a lot of interest in this conference. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you guys would agree, especially you who have gone before. None of you went before, I think. Well, Dave would be good for this. It appears that the conference is more and more following up its tendency towards focusing on, not the latest way of testing things or the latest, refactoring, sort of the more technical aspects of our work, but it's more and more on process and requirements and customer and all of those, softer side things, which I interpret as a way of saying that people have figured out that the technical issues are no longer at the frontier, that those aren't the hardest problems left to solve. So that's minorly disappointing in the sense that when you're a developer and you like to get a little of both, and it seems to be getting overly biased towards just the process, software side stuff. So hopefully, and I'm sure people were talking about that and they're paying attention to that, so I hope to see some drift next year back toward the techy stuff. Peter Coffey gave one of the keynotes. Does anybody know Peter Coffey? He's a writer and editor of various things. Heard of him? Seemed like a reasonably smart guy. And I'm just going to do a quick one on his. He talked about readings for the Agile developer. These are things you do not hear people talk about suggesting that developers read. And I thought some of these books looked like they would be interesting to look into. This one, Up the Organization, is all about organizations in general, not going to do anything with IT. Peter quoted this book as talking about a 25% effectiveness loss for every layer of communication that you have. So I think we probably all sort of experienced that, right? He also talked about risk being proportional to the square of communication. The more communication you have to do, the more risk you're injecting, which argues is support, I think, for a lot of things, the practices I know we strongly believe in, the power of small teams, the flatness of an organization, and not trying to communicate between specialists with things like Word documents, but favoring people talking to each other and generalists over specialists. He also had a very interesting point that this guy brings up in Up the Organization about, as a job preservation strategy, we all are in a much better position to be strategists for the business than we are just being the IT person. So if we understand our businesses, and we can understand how our businesses make money and what their opportunities are, And then use our technologist background to say, well, to support that, we can use this technology or we can take this approach. That's a much more powerful position to be in work-wise than just coming to the game and saying, well, you tell me what you want to build and we'll figure out how to build it. You know, that's sort of opting out of the business side is a risky strategy, which I thought was a very good point. Systemantic sounds like a fun one to read. I guess this was, it's a short little thing. It's hard to find in print anymore. But he made one extremely interesting point, and that is, for any given large system, you can pretty much count on it working poorly, and maybe being 5% efficient. So it's going to be inefficient, and it's going to work in a state of brokenness a lot of the time. And what that says is, this should really be a requirement, that operating in a state of brokenness should be something that we actually design for. That if you design a large system with the assumption that it has to be working 100%, you have designed a very brittle system. And that you're better off acknowledging this and making sure that your system degrades gracefully and can operate under less than ideal circumstances. It also favors smaller existing systems over new, out-of-the-box, you know, didn't evolve from a working system, a small working system, just can't try to come into existence as a huge system. So Paul's raising his eyebrows. What do you think of that? Let's look at Dr. Jorgensen.
Curious.
Curious, yeah. You should get this book and read it. Tell me all about it. All your academic spare time.
In all of my spare time.
Come on, if we can't rely on the academics to, you know, go out there and do this kind of work.
What do they make a movie out of it?
Okay. I think, you know. The World is Flat, of course, this is widely talked about book now, and he pulled a few points out of it, which are certainly, I think, consistent with an agile approach to software development, establishing trusting relationships, co-creating with customers, whole team practice, right? That's it right there. The other one that I thought was quite interesting is his point, Friedman's point, is that you shouldn't look at technology as a means of cost cutting. You should look at it as a means of staying in the game. And that in the long run, there is no innovation which is ultimately sustainable. You know, somebody is going to start doing the same thing you're going to do. And your only hope is not to just continue to do it better, but to actually reinvent the game. And that's the way you should look at technology, not as a means of reducing your cost. He also Friedman talks quite a bit about, you know, the world flattening out and new technologies, enabling things that weren't possible before. So one small example of that was, you know, an application that would have been too expensive to distribute because the base would have been too small. If you can use a web distribution mechanism, then all of a sudden that whole cost goes away and maybe an application is now viable where it wouldn't have been before. So it's really good stuff. Anybody read this book? I read it. It was a good book. I thought it was quite interesting. A little overblown on some of the IT stuff, but I think the political message is actually more interesting. And the last book he talks about is Thriving on Chaos by Tom Peters. How about this one? Anyone read this one? See, we're not reading very widely, are we? Maybe that's the point of his keynote. This is, according to Peter Coffey, the only book that Tom Peters did not later retract, which I thought was kind of interesting. And evidently in Thriving on Chaos, he makes the point that there are, in fact, no excellent companies, which is one of his ways of retracting the previous and earlier work. I guess the point there is that companies get good at staying good, that they don't, it's not just a matter of putting together something that's excellent and then it just keeps running itself, but you have to, you know, get the culture of constant innovation in whatever your business is and improvement and caring in order to continue to be a good company. But there's not a magic formula for that, which we certainly see. This is another place where it's making the point that IT people should be knowing the business and how to use technology, not just being technologists. And then evidently being obsessed with responsiveness. In fact, according to Peters, responsiveness is more important than fulfillment. You can get away with dropping the ball or not doing as good a job if you're responsive. And I think we've seen that with some of our customer relations, that the quality and the ultimate fulfillment is important, of course, but ultimately it's, you know, returning the phone calls and being communicative and emails and, you know, being there when they want to talk to you when you need it. So I think there's a lesson there to call us on that one. For me especially, and my email, keep it grows without backward. What was the other thing on that? Oh, I love this. The Japanese word for large is translated into English as not delicately crafted. Isn't that a great name for software craftsmanship? Kind of a big company. Not delicately crafted. So there's some reading ideas for you. We'll put the notes up on the website so you can get them later too. Digital Focus published a survey that somebody was talking about at the conference. And I have one right here. Someone is more than welcome to walk out of here with this. I really don't want to recycle it, so feel free to grab it in the break or whenever. A survey that they did over the course of last year about Agile adoption. And there's some interesting things there. Big companies are doing it on a project basis. Middle-sized companies are doing it organizationally wide, so a wider adoption. One of the cool things about this conference this year, and Dave's going to talk a little bit about this, was listening to these giant companies talk about their Agile projects. So this used to be the Agile stuff with good 8 people, 10 people. But you can't scale it up. People are scaling it up. The reasons that people give for Agile adoption are sort of like the flip side of this from a business and IT perspective. Requirements and the ability to get them defined well, that's from the developer's perspective. And the ability to handle change as the business changes, that's from the business person's perspective. So it's two sides of the same coin, and that's the most common feature that people are looking for to improve with the adoption of Agile. And the greatest barriers they've identified are just lack of experience with Agile practices. This is where the people who do coaching always come in with a pitch about being a good coach, which I do believe is a good thing. And then lastly, this is the one that we've certainly seen quite a bit of, difficulty of organizational change. It's just hard for an established culture to get change. And that organizational change stuff is all about things that none of us studied in school while we were learning to be project managers or software developers or testers or business analysts probably. So I think there's a lot of scope for running into hard barriers there. One of the experience reports that I heard, I don't know, did you guys go to the Voltec experience report with the rental car company? Large rental car company, they didn't say which one, but it was the one that's second biggest. It's their slogan is try harder or something. It's that one. They did two agile projects using XP. So this is not a conventional waterfall project versus an agile project. This is two XP projects. One was a disaster and one was a success. So same staff, same people doing it, same departments, same consultants, that's Voltec, same domain, rental car business, and using the same technology. I think it was Java and some other 3-letter acronyms associated with Java. They got very, very different results. Delivery-wise, here's how different it was. The first one that wasn't successful, didn't deliver until 15 months into the project. And then they had a second phase of delivery 22 months into the project. The second project delivered its first delivery in 9 weeks, and then did so every 6 weeks. They were rolling out new software every 6 weeks. Dramatic difference. If Ron Jeffries was here, he'd be talking about deliver early and often, right? Clearly, the second project had that one down. The differences they pointed to after they did a post-mortem sort of a thing, a reflection in their paper, was stakeholder buy-in. That was one of the big ones. Having a real customer versus, or having an expert customer drive the development versus actual users. So this is sort of subtle. In one case, they had an accountant who might have been the CFO driving development in a way that accountants like to think. But the actual users of the system were not accountants. They were people who worked in the office. And as a result, they produced a system that the users did not like or were happy with. And that was the one that went 15 months. It was not successful. Cubes versus conference rooms. The unsuccessful project stuck to the cubes and didn't dare rock the facilities boat. Isn't it odd how important that is? But really it is. It's a vital thing. The other one said, yeah, we're going to take over this conference room. It was the one big room model. And then the last one was why they did the projects. The first project, one that wasn't a success, was motivated more by a desire for people to learn objects and learn Java and learn some Java frameworks. In other words, it had a significant training exercise rationale to it that it did not have as compelling a business value rationale. Yes, we need to replace this ancient system, but while we're at it, we're going to learn Java and objects and do this and this Agile stuff. That was sort of its reason for existing. And it was hard to argue, how much time got put into it versus the return on the investment. The second one was, I think it was having to do with handling insurance claims on rental cars. There was a clear return on your investment that they could trace. If we can get this thing out and saving this much time, we'll save this much money, and it paid itself back very quickly. So that difference there, one thing worth it in terms of business value and very compelling, and the other one not so worth it, not so compelling, ended up having, they thought, a huge impact on the attitudes of people and the overall success of the project.
So the same team implemented both?
Same team implemented both.
So the second project had a well-trained team, the first one I did?
Well, no, sorry, Kevin, that's not quite true. The same group, not the same people. These projects ran in parallel, if I recall. So
the same experience level.
Yeah, exactly. Same employee types, experience level. That I also have a copy of here if you're interested in that. Please take that. So I guess you could sort of read that as the title's a little confusing, but I think you could read it as how to not do a successful Agile project, which is quite valuable. Okay, let's that one. Switch over here. Now this is what I found to be the single most valuable thing at the whole conference was a talk that Ken Schwaber did. Ken Schwaber is the guy, the guru behind Scrum. Scrum has very clearly won the marketing game when it comes to Agile project management. Everybody's talking about Scrum. No one talks about the XP planning page. There's an awful lot of similarities in my mind. And Scrum doesn't speak to the engineering practices that XP does, which makes Scrum and XP highly compatible. But Scrum has the mind share when it comes to Agile project management. It's very clear. Tess has gone through Scrum training. Did Ken Schwaber do your? Yeah, okay. He seemed like a fun guy to go through the training course with. He seemed like a cool guy. Anyway, his talk was about Agile quality. And I wasn't sure what the heck it was going into it. The canary in the coal mine is a little bit hard to see. And really, the title really didn't have so direct relationship. But as I say, the subject matter was profound. I found it was the most valuable thing I'd heard. So this is what he points out. So he starts out with this. Business value is a function of cost, time, quality, and scope. You know that triangle is actually a quadrilateral, right? So if you say cost, time, quality, and scope, and you're willing to do a fixed price project and commit to a given deadline, then that only leaves quality and scope. But when you commit to a fixed price project at a certain date, almost 100% of the time, there's an expectation of what the scope you're going to deliver is. That's just part of the business requirements, part of the contract you're probably signing, either internally or externally, that you do it. So that's a hard lever in those kinds of business relationships to pull. So that only leaves quality. So your only hope, if you overcommit yourself to actually hit that cost and time and scope is to reduce the quality. And the most common way he points out that this happens is by changing the definition of what done means. So if done means, completely tested, accepted by users, produced down to a CD maybe. Somebody's comment at the conference was, end-to-end complete. The ends are always farther than you think. And the further you can find out and push that thing to the end, the earlier the better off you are. So all the way up that way. Then you can change the definition of done in sneaky ways. You can introduce what they call a stabilization phase, a patch your way to success approach. You can pass it off to the users and say, well, we're done, but the users might have feedback. They might be finding ridiculous bugs that shouldn't have been there in the first place, in other words. Or you can do an alpha release, another way to sort of cover yourself about what done means. Or a pre-release. So all these things are euphemisms for changing the definition of done. And it turns out this is going to have a huge and negative impact.
Depends on what it is.
Yeah, it's like that. Messing with basic language, not a good idea. So, under Magic and Lies, he talked about how customers oftentimes are willing to suspend disbelief, a willing suspension of disbelief. I don't know if he used that term, but I think that's what it struck me as. Customers know when there's 6 months of work to get done, and they insist on it getting done in 4 months, they really should know that you can't just, do magic. That there is no way of getting 6 months of work done and 4 months done without bad things happening. But they suspend their disbelief in this, and they rely on the magic of IT or the magic of their developers to pull this off. Developers, on the other hand, are completely willing to lie. To say, yeah, we'll make it. We'll figure out how to do it. Don't worry. Boss, we got you covered. We'll make that happen. Whatever it takes. And what usually it takes is cutting quality out to make it. Ken does an experiment in training. Did you talk about this? The 6,300 people he's applied this to. And I don't know, can you tell about the exercise? Do you know it? Did you experience it?
Yeah, I can't remember. It's been 10 months.
Yeah, it was 63, fill in if I get this wrong, 6,300 people he's given this thing to in his Scrum training. And it's sort of a mock role-playing kind of thing, I gathered, where you're set up as, customer and developers, and the customer is asking for for something to be delivered in less time than could possibly be done right. And 6,200 of those people in the circumstances of the 6,300 who were tested were completely willing to lie. Only 100 people, in his experience, were willing to say no, that can't be done, and stick to it.
Yeah, I think out of our class there's probably 30 people and one person said no.
One person?
Yeah. It wasn't me.
Well, and I guess, this is a controlled circumstance and an exercise, but, when you think about your own experience, maybe not so far off from what really goes on. So if the customers are willing to, suspend their disbelief and believe in magic, and developers are willing to lie, recipe for disaster. So how does quality get reduced in order to pull off the magic? Overtime and weekend work, very common. Stop developer testing, so no unit testing. Well, we don't have time for that. Compress the QA testing that has been scheduled for the end is another common technique. Any testers here? Getting compressed? Stop reviewing. No code review, no design review. Just crank it out. We don't have time to look at that. Ignore your own internal standards about quality development or whatever standards might need to be ignored in order to go faster somehow. Not refactoring, knowing that you've got crap code that needs to be refactored, but saying we don't have time, we're just going to route around it, lump clay, that kind of a thing. Those are usually the ways that quality gets reduced. So what you end up with here is what he talks about core functionality. Core functionality is something that they've observed over time. Every company has. And development on this core functionality, or legacy code, is what we've always talked about that as. Development is always slower. Your velocity when you're working in this legacy or this core is significantly slower than when you're working in greenfield development. So Ken started asking himself the question, how come everybody has this, and where does it come from? How does it accumulate? Here's the path to do it. So here's your first, let's suppose we got nothing, no legacy, we're just going to start out. We got a 6-month project. Developers have estimated, okay, that's 6 months worth of time given the resources that we have to do. And they have some measurement of their velocity. Let's say it's 18, whatever units are, something like that. So this is, we know how fast we can move, and this is 6 months ago. But the customer or the business person says, nope, deadline's in 5 months. We got to get the trade show, or we got to get the first quarter, we got to get whatever. Maybe even thinking, you know what, I can live with it in 6 months. Push these people to deliver in 5 months because I don't trust them. So the developers pull it off by cutting quality. And the first time they get away with it, team's a hero, software delivered, corners were cut. What do you think the likelihood of any of those cut corners ever being addressed is? Later. Slim, right? Zero, Steve says. I would agree with it. These things, even with the best intentions, they never go back and get redone. Well, that's working software now. We couldn't possibly go back and refactor that thing, or that's working, why test it? Okay, so then the next time your boss asks you to do this, 6 months of work, 5-month deadline, your velocity is a little lower because now you have this legacy baggage, right? So you have to get more quality to get the data. Then the third project, 6 months of work, 5-month deadline. Velocity is slower yet still, and maybe it's getting slower faster because you have more and more baggage of the crappy quality that's starting to drag you down and you're starting to feel that pain. So you cut the quality even harder, but you hit the data. At some point, you're not moving. You can't touch that legacy code anymore. You can't work with it. Your velocity is essentially zero. So you've got this thing that can't be manipulated. It's so fragile, so huge, so insufficient to its needs that it is an albatross around your neck. So he says that his observation is that companies get themselves in this pickle somewhere between 3 and 10 years. It takes them that long to paint themselves into a corner with respect to their legacy, such that competition can arrive with no legacy, no core, nothing to hold them down, slow them down. They can get new functionality out much faster than market. So suddenly, competition, real competition, threatening the company, new product development. I don't know where he got this number, maybe Paul's seen it before. Claim was, every dollar gained by cutting quality costs you 4 to restore later. Ever heard this? I have written to him to ask him where he came up with the number, but I didn't get a response. But whatever the ratio is, I can believe there's some, multiple there, for sure. His point is, if that's the case, if you're cutting your quality in order to hit arbitrary dates, that you're, in effect, building this technical debt. That's always the term we've used for it. You're building up this technical debt. that somebody at the very top of the company should be making a decision about that. Knowing what's going on and not having it be an invisible debt that's being built up. And that in effect, the value of your software as an asset should be reduced on your balance sheet to reflect the fact that you have cut corners and reduced the value of that asset. And that if you raise it to that level, that people in the boardroom are saying, oh, last quarter I see that the value of this core asset went down, how come? That's the kind of discussion it's going to take, the kind of visibility it's going to take for people to actually understand what's going on and the trade-offs that are being made. The cost of supporting these magical beliefs on the customer's part, unfortunately, is usually hidden. The way you see people handling their rotten cores are to build redundant core functionality. Well, the core is bad, the legacy is bad, we just have to build this functionality in a new application because that's easier than dealing with the core. Ignoring work on the core, well, we assume the core works fine, the legacy is fine, we're going to build our new development. In other words, faking what done means. Dropping functionality, trying to adjust scope on the new stuff to accommodate more development time on the old stuff. Shifting development resources to the core so it starts attracting more and more developers, taking more and more time away from new development. Or you just start rebuilding. Actually, I think that that latter one is the solution that is not as often considered as it should be. The logical outcome of his logic is that you need to consider that, the cost of that, more fully. So, what we're doing as developers when we play this game and we lie and we cut quality to hit a date is we are dropping quality to save our jobs, but we're putting our whole company at risk as time goes on and this builds up. So it's a heck of a price to pay if your boss exerts pressure on you to hit a deadline, and the only way to do it is to drop quality. You may save your job that short term, but you're probably going to kill your company. I thought that was a very interesting, powerful insight. So, his point is, no one, everyone is like, oh yeah, it's a bad problem. Go change, right? Change starts with ourselves. You got to start internally. Speaking truth to power, I think, is what is the problem here. That 6,200 out of 6,300 people who wouldn't say that's impossible. It's a speaking truth to power kind of problem. This is a difficult thing. One of the principles of XP is courage. And I think that's what one of the things that Kent Beck is getting at when he made that a principle, is the ability to do things like this. So now I've come to the point where we're going to reveal the secret atomic object internal logo. One of our guys, Carlin actually, right back there, came up with this logo after we had a long and involved conversation about what are the core values that we look for more in hiring people. And one of those is you have to really care. You have to really care enough that you're willing to speak truth to power. That you're willing to tell customers uncomfortable things. And that you're not willing to cut quality when you're pushed to push hard. And that you have these beliefs that are based on the fact that you give a shit. So this isn't seen in public very often. This is his first unveiling. Okay, I'd be interested in observations you guys have on that, on Ken Schwaber's thesis. Saving our job, killing our company.
Question about the sequence of projects where the velocity diminished. Was it continuations of one big thing, or was it over separate?
I think he was sort of talking abstractly about the more legacy you have that got there by having its quality cut, and the more you have to deal with it, the bigger that is, and the velocity on anything that touches it goes down to the extent that that
because you're spending more time
in that big mess, that morass.
I guess the one thing that I had is 30 years ago, Larry Putnam talked about the same thing.
Yes?
Where you compress the development interval and you pay kind of to the fourth power penalty after.
Fourth power. Maybe that's where that $1, $4 got mixed up with David. Fourth power's a lot worse than
Pretty severe.
Yeah, pretty severe. 30 years ago, Larry Putnam.
1977. I was there.
Ah.
I don't see it.
True?
This is kind of like speculation, but when the Windows 2000 source code was leaked, people looked through it. They saw a lot of things like corners being cut in order to make old software work, like changes to the operating system made so that Office 95 wouldn't crash when it freed a pointer that it shouldn't have freed. And now Windows Vista is like 6 years past the time when it should be released. Try this one.
That might be the ultimate example of core bogging you down. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a statement of, save your job or sacrifice quality.
Yeah.
Is that a fallacy?
That's a great
I
question.
mean, has anyone here actually seen somebody writing quality software get fired because they're going too slow? I mean,
Anyone?
I've never cut quality, and I've always been liked strongly by my managers because my QA time is really short.
Anyone?
I've been asked to look for other opportunities
Really?
for one to do more testing when none existed.
Were you happy to actually have the opportunity to look for other opportunities when it came right down to it?
I'm still doing that right now.
We might want to talk to you. I agree the same thing around what you're getting at. I've given this advice that many people, look, they're not going to fire you. It comes right down to it. If you're doing it for good reasons and you speak to your principals and you tell the truth, they do not fire you. And most managers recognize that. I think. So I guess we have one counterexample here, but I think you're right. I think it's overblown. Mark, you had a...
I've seen people not get fired outright, but have the culture to come down hard on them, pretty much squeeze them out of the organization after standing up and saying no, backhand. So it might not be an out-and-out firing, but there's more than one way to fire someone.
I'm not talking about saying no that can't be done. I'm saying when you're coding, I mean, what I've had to do a lot of times is smile and nod politely, and my stuff ends up being late, which so far hasn't been a big problem because the people writing crap code were just as late as me, especially after you factor in their time, their cycles through QA. So, but I don't know, I've always worked around people where the whole project is late, not just my stuff.
One thing that has kind of come clear to me in the last couple of years is that there's this typical dichotomy between management and implementation. And something that I think gets overlooked in a lot of the conversations is the goal of management. And in one sense, you're saying, well, the goal of management is to make sure the company doesn't go out of business, make sure they continue to make money, et cetera. But at a micro level, a boss's job is to tell his boss what he wants to hear. And I think that's what comes down to not being able to say no to your boss when he says we need it in 5 months. But he has a boss who is also telling him it's 5 months. And he is now, and I think he realizes this, out of control of the situation. He's not the one writing the code, so he can't make it take a month less. All he can do is badger you until you do that. But this powerlessness can lead to panicky situations, getting yanked off the project, getting marginalized out of your position. And it really has nothing to do with the fact that he's going to go home and go, we really need quality software. He's going to go home and say, if I go into that meeting tomorrow, no, we can't hit this date, and this other project slips and we'll lose $100 million, he's going to fire me. So that level of pressure rolls downhill. So they may not fire you, but there's a great deal of tension, and that powerlessness has got to be factored into the equation.
I think
Maybe
that's
softball.
I think that's what Schwaber's getting at when he says this visibility needs to rise up to the top where people understand the decisions are made. Okay, we missed a $100 million sale, but maybe we're putting our whole company at risk 2-3 years from now. That kind of decision needs to be made not down at our level where we're living daily, quality cutting decisions, but up at the strategic level where people should be thinking about the cost of what they're asking.
So I guess what I was getting at is give your boss ammunition so he can go to the or her
To take it out.
slipping in the basket. Give them ammunition that they can use on other managers. Your arguments will convince every geek in the room, no question. The geeks don't run the company except in certain isolated situations, unfortunately. But if they're in a very stratified company with 3 layers between you and the CEO, they're not all that.
I got the distinct impression, and I don't know if you saw this in the Scrum training, Tessa, but it seems that Ken Schwaber has the name and arguments to play at those levels, and that his sort of mission in life now is is to get CEOs to understand this dynamic and get them engaged so that you have CEOs dropping by the project. So guys, are we cutting any corners? Guys in that Michigan generic pronoun sense, I hope you don't mind using. So people, are we cutting any corners? You know, what decisions are being made here? That kind of CEO engagement. And that someone should feel comfortable, this is what you're saying. Someone should feel, a developer should feel comfortable going to a CEO and saying, this is what's rolled downhill, these are the consequences that we'll face. Interesting. Oh.
I think a lot of it is the whole company culture. Okay, and if you don't have universal buy-in on quality, you're killing yourself. If the techies think it's a great idea and management doesn't, it's dead on arrival. It's never going to change. Okay, and, once again, I go back to the environment I worked in a long time ago. Always quality and deadlines are kind of at odds. We had in place a mechanism where if you as a conscientious designer felt that a deadline was threatening quality, you could go to the department of quality analyst who was at the director level, and the problem would get fixed. And everybody, at the beginning of a project, everybody would sign on and say, yeah, we believe in this. And what that did is it forced universal acceptance of, yeah, quality counts. And when someone seriously objected to it, there were no reprisals, nobody lost their job, nobody got put on a shelf. If anything, we were recognizing, all right, here's a guy who really had a commitment to do what we wanted to do.
So this is kind of like Toyota production system, the red line running down the assembly line, anybody can pull the stuff the whole line?
Close. I don't think it was a sequential thing. There was a lot of parallel development.
Right.
But the point is, the whole organization wanted equality. It took about 5 years to make that happen. It's never going to happen now.
It's that whole culture change that was identified as a stumbling hurdle for Agile.
But once it's there, it's marvelous. Okay, and it takes absolute commitment. And if you don't have it, it's mixed commitment. It's never going to work. It's absolutely never.
Is it commitment or trust? But you have to believe that what you're telling me is true.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing.
Okay.
I would like to say that his comments about it all starts with us and with courage. I think courage has to be reflected with trust. And talk about strategic organizations. At every level, that courage has to be met with trust in order for it to continue up the chain. So that's my kind of analysis of that. And again, if the chain of courage and trust is broken, then you're not going to be effective.
I guess we never had a trust issue, but you got to take the problem, you know what the problem is.
Well, this touches on a whole bunch of issues of, heavy sphere of influence. Everybody's sphere of influence doesn't include the entire company. So you have to know where your influence is and what change you can affect. I mean, you can sit around and have a negative caustic attitude, which may be driven by the right reason, but handled in a completely inappropriate way. It doesn't empower anybody to change anything.
to not be somebody else who just finally says, yeah, I can do it, but you don't know, well, you can't. I'm not going to fold my hands and tell my boss I'm not going to do anything because I don't have the time to do everything that I believe needs to be done, but I'm not going to lie to a leader. So I mean, he knows that if I see something, I'm not going to act like I didn't see it, but I'm also going to do as much as I can as well.
Yeah, I think this is why, scale is the enemy of most things good. Because at some point, like you say, sphere of influence isn't adequate.
Yeah, I mean, I work on projects where there's a couple hundred people, and it's a 4-year or 5-year project. It's a much, much bigger engine.
You ever see that great study from DoD projects showing the probability of a project success going down from basically 100% when they're small down to 0 when they're 3 years or over? Big stuff. Anybody else? Comments? Observations? Okay, why don't we take a small break for snacks? I'm starving. And then when we come back, have a little more panel activity so you guys know the board too. That's honestly. Matt Fletcher has worked for us just over a year. He cut his teeth here on a robot project, a really cool robot project for recorder machinery. And that was after finishing his master's from MSU. So lately he's been working for Chrysler, Chrysler and Savant, extending our TDD work into the embedded space.
All right, now I'm on these slides, but I went to one of the sessions by Talking Head, is what they called it. In this case, it was Bob Mark, who was a pretty famous Agile figurehead. And probably, as far as I know, his most profound work was a book, a textbook called Agile Software Development Principles, Practices, or something else. It's a pretty good book. It reinforces a lot of simple, we might call them, yet foundation practices in Agile development. Carl's used it in courses that he's taught. Anyway, so Bob gets up there. He's one of the more figurehead types, the more famous types. So it was a big crowded room. Everybody wanted to see him. He got up there, and we first started talking about just some, at the time it seemed like pointless blabbering about some, I think it was like an ancient mathematician that had come up with some formulas for something that nobody really cared about. And then he went on for about 45 minutes, basically talking about his book and going over some of the stuff in his book. And essentially, I started to get bored because I had just read the book shortly before that, so it seemed like just reinforcement and thinly veiled plug for his book. But then towards the end, he somehow segued into a really, really interesting topic that really caught my attention. And it was one of those things where it was obvious, but only after someone like him had pointed it out. The first assertion he had made earlier on was, or the first discussion he had early on was about this mathematician who had come up with these formulas. I think this is what it was. Unfortunately, I can't remember the details exactly because his talk is not available in the proceeding, which is disappointing. But he was talking earlier in the discussion about this stuff that had been discovered a long time ago in some field, and then someone like Copernicus or Galileo eventually used that work to prove some stuff about the universe. And it was unrelated work, but turned out to be perfect for what he needed to get the job done. And that's what segued into his overall thesis in this discussion was unit testing, which is a great thing that a lot of us here do, has really helped make the people critical of dynamic languages turn around. So when I say dynamic languages, I think usually we're talking about Ruby and Python are the most actively talked about dynamic languages at this point in time. And what we mean by that is they're dynamic in that the type system isn't the same as like a C or C++ or Java or C#, where you have a compile stage where a compiler goes through it and decides, is this object legal to use in this case right here? Is the type safe to use? Ruby and Python lose the rules a lot by just passing these objects around and letting you use however you want. And when you actually call a method on the object, that's when the object can choose to respond to that request, or it can blow up in your face. So when you pass an object into a method, there's no type associated with it. It just either works for what you need or it works for what you don't need. A lot of people are critical of this lack of static typing, because then you don't have a compiler that can tell you up front at compile time that you're using this object the wrong way, it's going to blow up. You don't have it anymore. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. You know, what I'm saying is that one of the disadvantages is you don't have a machine telling you it's going to break. The advantages are something that there's many advantages, and that's not the point of the talk. But the disadvantage, but his main assertion, therefore, comes down to unit testing can help cover that disadvantage. Because unit testing is going to stress your code, if you're doing it right, in such a way that hopefully, if an object doesn't respond the way you expect it to, you'll know about it. Your unit test will tell you that. If you're using the code the wrong way, if you're using this class or module or whatever the wrong way, your unit test will hopefully blow up in your face. And so, in essence, instead of the compiler telling you that it's going to blow up, the unit test did.
Isn't that by definition integration? I mean, if you're testing your unit, but you refer to the class of an object outside your unit, okay, how is that in your unit? To me, that's integration.
Well, it might be a base type, but it would still be typed in a type language. So if you use a string, it's still typed.
Right. So, like I said, his assertion was that the unit test has, in a sense, picked up where the compiler has left off. And I thought that was a good observation. I had just started using Ruby and dynamic languages, and it was one of those things, like I said earlier on, it wasn't obvious to me until he said it, that, wow, the unit tests are covering me where the compiler usually would. I don't have to worry so much about the lack of static typing. It does backfire sometimes, and he didn't talk about any of these cases, but I just ran into this last week even, where we encountered a situation where an object was getting passed in to a method, and that method was trying to make a method call on that object, and it was the wrong type. It just didn't respond to that. And sure enough, it blew up in someone's face. And it happens. But what was the solution? We just identified the problem, made a unit test for it, fixed it, and moved on. So you don't get 100% protection, but you get a lot of protection. And then when you do encounter these situations where things go wrong, you just go ahead and add your unit test and fix it and move on, just like the regular TD cycle. So in summary, Bob Martin's assertion was that unit tests cover you in terms of typing where the compiler normally would in a statically typed language. And I thought that was a good observation. So that's what.
So the idea is then that you can take advantage of the power of the dynamic language.
Yeah. So, yeah, I missed that. There's a lot of advantages to dynamic languages that are out of the scope of this short discussion here. Now we can finally leverage those the way we really want to and with the kind of protection that we would like to have.
Cool. Any questions? Comments? I've seen this flipped around the other way to have people argue that, well, I have this strongly typed compiled language, and the compiler is on my side, so the unit testing isn't as important. Which is ridiculous, but you see it flip the other way. Sean, yes?
I saw a talk that Dave Thomas gave 2 years ago at OSCON, and he had done some studies about why unit tests, one, are still important for type languages. And that was an analysis of a lot of Java programs where objects were sitting in collections and being casted off those collections. And also, he was using that as an argument to maybe people who are used to a language like Java kind of reduce their fear from moving to something like Python or Ruby. we kind of are relying on these objects being passed and treated as such like at runtime as opposed to keep up.
You have a comment, Drew? I see an answer.
Yeah, it kind of seems to a certain extent like, I mean, static typing will only get you so far in the types of things it will protect you from, because it's pretty general and not very, you can't write, most type systems aren't powerful enough to say, you know, the return type of this function is such that under certain conditions the return value is restricted to this set, and under other conditions it's restricted to this other set. You basically have this large class of possible values, and as long as it's any one of those values, you're okay, or at least as far as the type checker goes. But then, beyond that, too, it doesn't tell you anything about whether or not you're even getting the right value, even if it is in that restricted set, whereas with unit tests, you can check your boundary conditions and things like that. But everybody knows that, so.
I was going to ask Patrick to go next, but he's also going to talk about something about market reserves. So I think I'm going to skip over you, Patrick, and get Justin. Justin has worked for us for about coming up on a year, and he is one of the apprentices that he did his apprenticeship, the Grand Valley student did his apprenticeship with us, and we hired him from that. Currently working on a text writing project for us. Yes.
This is like sort of my first time being exposed to the whole Agile world. And so when I went to, there was an experience report that I really liked, and there's another one called Rapid Testing Approaches by Michael Bolton. He's a decent big name. And I sort of highlighted some points that I saw that sort of stuck out to me. And I'm just going to go look through them and just talk about them. If you guys have questions or observations, feel free to jump in. There's no real order as you're going. So in any case, the first one I'll touch on is rapid testing approaches. The first one he said is that there's different types of testing that people do, and there's thorough, rapid, slapdash, and then ponderous. And what I kind of observed from that is sort of like an evolution of testing, like thorough and ponderous. Like if I go back to my first one testing, I would call myself that kind of tester. Like I didn't really know what I was doing, so I would ponder a lot. Like, well, how am I going to test this? I honestly don't know how to test this. I didn't have the technical knowledge. Nor the systems thinking to really figure out how to test something well. So I spent a lot of time just thinking about it and maybe not making useful tests, which he describes as slow and very expensive. But I think sometimes it's sort of required to actually learn how to test correctly, along with having someone that is very good at testing, pairing with you, and sort of driving them. And another one that's not very good, which in my opinion is something that you can avoid altogether, which is slapdash, or as I call it, I think my note says lazy. And I said creates tests for the sake of having them and often by no value. It's kind of like writing something that says, I don't know, assert true, false, or something like that. It doesn't do anything, or assert true, true. And it means nothing. And another one is rapid testing, which in my opinion is a skill tester. Someone who sees testing as a challenge. They enjoy it, they try to do it fast, efficient, and right. And they have the technical know-how and skills to do it. And they've also had enough experience with enough systems thinking where they can write good tests. And other ones he said that testing should happen in bursts, as in, I guess when you're driving, let's say you can write a class of some sort, you should write all your unit tests out for, I guess, as many methods as you can possibly think of. Run your tests, see that they fail, assert that your conditions are set, and then write the code and see that they don't pass. And I don't know if that's like a feel-good observation, like, oh, look at that, everything works, everything's good, everything's right after I've written all these tests. But he said that's something that's really important. Diversified teams. Always rotate your pairs. Always have people pairing with different people. And I think if I recall, he said that spreads the technical knowledge and the experience amongst all different kinds of people. So at the end of the day, or I guess at the end of the iteration of something, they are gathering more and more knowledge from different people, not just sort of bias and learning from one person, or just from themselves, which can be completely wrong. Another one I thought was interesting, and this one came up in the Clean Code talk, was concise documentation. As in, don't spend lots and lots of time writing documentation, because your unit tests should describe what you're doing, and your code should describe what you're doing, not large amounts of documentation. And I've seen this debate all over the place because, A, you can't unit test your documentation. You could have really good code, then someone goes in and change it, they unit test, it's good, but your documentation is completely confusing because it doesn't mean what you meant before. And so they also say, don't bring your documentation into your unit tests, and try not to put too much into your actual methods. Just don't do it. Your code should be very obvious, and so should your tests. And then the next one, which I think is really important, and I think it's hard for all of us to do at times, especially when you first come in, is admit units. He said it's important to not guess or make assumptions when testing. Saying I don't know is the first step to learning what to be right. But one thing is, once you've been told what is right, make sure you remember it, else you might get in trouble later, especially if you're pairing with someone who doesn't want to tell you over and over again. But always admit ignorance, because that's the only way you can actually learn and get test right. And let's see, training your mind. That goes back to sort of like experience, like technical knowledge. Like if you weren't aware of what's the difference between interactive-based testing and state-based testing, and what they mean, and knowing mock object libraries and how to use them correctly, and when to state-based test versus when to interactively-based test. And if you don't know those things, you're going to be kind of slow going. You might do things wrong. And so you have to train your mind to sort of go really fast and know when to do it and when not to do it. And general systems thinking, that kind of goes back to just understanding how the application is going to work, and experience. And domain knowledge. So domain knowledge would be like, you know about nmod, you know about NMIN, you know how to use those libraries efficiently. And then thinking critically. And that should be pretty straightforward. Always think critically. And then I think it's a note to put at the bottom was, I think a good tester and a good rapid tester enjoys devising ways of new and better testing approaches, and enjoys writing the tests more than they actually enjoy writing the code. Like they get more excited out of writing the test than just going out and just whipping out somebody, blah, code, awesome. They kind of write their test and feel good about that, and the design and the pattern they put forth, and then the code is sort of just a satisfaction. And then lastly, I put, you feel like nothing has been accomplished, or as I say, you feel dirty until you actually do the test. And I think those three things are sort of important. If you do rapid testing, you sort of have to kind of enjoy it, or else you just feel like you're getting forced to push.
So he was describing a test in effective developer.
Yeah.
That's interesting to hear Michael talk about that, because he comes sort of out of a more traditional testing approach and not developer tester testing.
Right. Yeah, because I didn't really know who he was, so, but those were some points I actually sort of felt really good, and I heard before, but they really good reinforcements, and there's some new things in there that,
You spoke here, what, a year ago or 2 years ago or something? Last year.
Oh, what's the name of it? Michael Bolton.
Like the singer.
I like the singer. Like the singer. Like the singer. Okay. Yeah.
I said he was famous, that's true.
He's a celebrity.
Highly overloaded video.
Yeah, he gets that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all I have on rapid testing approaches. I think the next one is value-based, and it's pretty short. Any questions on the testing one? It's pretty straightforward.
Got a question. It seems to advocate a style of writing your tests first.
Yeah, versus tests.
Versus.
I think that's what he's trying to say. I can't remember exactly.
Sort of. Well, traditional approaches mean they normally say write one test, make it pass.
What?
Then write the next test.
Write test, watch it fail, implement it, watch it pass.
So
yeah.
he's saying something like build this batch of tests which Microsoft got shot about.
Like, I'm assuming that's what he's saying because I'm trying to remember vaguely. Like, I wrote this down and I go versus test, which pretty much means not a lot, but I think if I'm trying to think back and extract it, I think he sort of meant, yeah, write your tests, like in a burst of tests that, and the burst of tests could be like you have 3 tests for one method, maybe he meant that would be like assert all the paths in the method that you go through, or does it mean implement all the test flow.
Is he using tests for correctness, or is he using tests to drive his design?
I think he's using tests to drive this design, I think.
I would say the other.
Other way? Oh, tests to drive this. Correctness. Okay.
That's what I would guess.
Okay.
His perspective would be that one, not the designer's perspective.
Okay.
But it helps you focus. I think it helps you focus because you can think of all the conditions, like all the boundary conditions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of why. Yeah. It's sort of why.
And then go back.
Yeah. It's sort of why you test first, is so you can lay out your design and also the practice of what you're going to do.
Right. But if you're doing one test at a time, you can kind of, it's easy to forget.
What the system of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, or forget some test that you thought of because you're thinking like, oh, I have to make this work right.
Yeah, I mean, I can buy into that too. I mean, it's up for debate. I mean, I don't lean one way or the other. But I thought it was an interesting observation that there's some people out there that, but yeah, everybody likes that. Cool observations.
Justin, since we have two more, I mean, I've got a couple
sure.
of them, and then let's have Patrick talk about code. Patrick Bacon has 10 years experience in a variety of areas of companies, financial services, and e-commerce. He's been with us for a year, and he also got introduced on the robot, mostly. Worked with Matt and took over from Matt, and Matt went off that project, so he took it to fruition and watched this robot drive a car on the back.
Okay. Very cool. Okay, so I attended a session also by Bob Martin entitled Clean Code. And this had a lot of similar themes to Ken Schwaber's Canary Talk, when he was aimed a little more at a technical audience. Most of the time spent was actually going through Java code. There was a project command line argument parser that he had written. He had done it TDD, and after he was done with one kind of iteration with it, he was happy with it, cleaned it up, and then he started adding on to it. And he realized after adding on a little more functionality, that what had started out as really clean and nice code had turned into a mess. And so there's a lot of points that he brought up. I'm not going to go through the code and refactor, which were interesting, but I found I got more use out of the kind of why you need to keep the code clean, and that kind of goes to some of the things that so first he talked about bad code, and he asked everyone if you've ever been significantly impeded by bad code. I'm sure most of us have, where your low quality of the code is going to slow you down. The same concept of legacy code, as the bigger and better it grows, the slower you go. So he followed that up with asking, well, why did you write it? And his point wasn't that everyone in the audience were bad programmers, that you all start out with good intentions and you write the code, you have a good design, and then the requirements change, and you don't have enough time, so you make a change to it, you'll get back to refactoring a little bit later, and it grows, and pretty soon you have bad code and everything slows down.
Or you let them come into it.
Right, that's another option. So why clean code? And what he said was nothing has a more profound and long-term degrading effect than bad code. He said that bad schedules can be redone, bad requirements can be resolved, but bad code rots and ferments. It just gets worse and worse. You eventually will get to the point where every change breaks another part of the code. And he says fixing a festering pile is a long and arduous task. Keeping it clean is relatively easy. And I think, that's kind of what the pragmatic programmers talk about, and don't live with a broken window. If something is broken, you can fix it right away. You need to clean it up, because if you let it go, you're going to get more and more broken windows, and eventually you're not going to be able to fix it. So how do you keep the code clean? The most important thing is automated unit and acceptance tests. If you have the confidence to make changes to your code, once you have it working, if you feel comfortable making the changes to clean it up, to do some refactoring, then you're more likely to do so. Without the confidence that the tests give you, it's working, you don't want to touch it, you need to move on. You want to keep the system running at all times, and you do this by making changes in tiny increments. One of the things that he said was, one of the best ways to ruin a program is to make massive changes in the name of improvement. It can be difficult to get it working again. So whether you're working on a new project or you're coming into something that's a legacy project, if you're going to be making changes, you want to do it one tiny step at a time. So he went through his Java examples, and he would make a very small refactoring, and he would get the test to pass. And we'd keep doing that until he got, even if he had this kind of a large-scale change down the road, he knew what he was trying to get to. He made tiny changes, kept the system running, tiny changes, kept the system running. Occasionally, he would even introduce new code that he knew he was going to throw away a couple steps down the road, but in order to keep the system running, he had to introduce it. And he said that was one of the most important things, that you always have to keep the system running so you don't get into this mess where you've now broken the entire system. So some of the concepts, some of the points that I thought were the most intriguing, I found kind of to be reinforcement for things that you might already know, but it was good to hear from someone who's considered an authority like Bob Martins. It's not enough for code to work. Just because you got the code to work, you're not done working on that section. You know, it needs to be in good shape, it needs to be maintainable. Continuously keep your code as clean and simple as it can be. You don't want to let the rocket start. Again, broken windows. If you always keep it in a clean state, it's kind of like the kitchen sink. Don't let it get started. Wash the dishes right away, keep it clean. And one of the things he said is it's your responsibility as a developer to always check code in better than you check it out. So if you check something out and you see something that can be improved, then it's your responsibility to improve it and keep that code in the best possible state that it can be. Some additional just tidbits that maybe weren't directly related to the entire project that I thought, or the entire talk, that I thought were interesting for discussion at least. He said that he felt that comments are a remedial discipline. So what he was saying was that if you have a clean design, a simple design, well-named variables, small, well-named methods, you can alleviate the need for comments almost entirely, if not entirely. So the discussion broke out about whether you should or should not comment your code. And his belief was that comments are a way to cover up bad coding. He said that test code should be of the same or higher quality as the real code. He said that he makes no distinction between test code and production code or real code. They're both production. They both need to be maintained down the road. You need to spend as much time keeping your test code in good shape as you do the real code. And another observation that he pointed out was that private methods classes should not be tested. You want to test the public interface only. And if a private method grows to the point where you feel that it needs to be tested, then that's probably a sign that it should be pulled out and put into a separate class where that class can be tested publicly. And I found that very interesting because that's the same kind of realization that Atomic Object has come to through years of testing, trial, and error, that it's usually the best to only test the public interface. And if necessary, create another class so you can test its public interface as opposed to going into the private methods. Finally, he just talked about professional behavior. He said that professionals write tests first, professionals clean their code, and professionals know that the only way to go fast is to go well. So that comes a summary. Any questions or observations?
Let's go out.
Yeah, doesn't it? But that, one thing that surprised me that I don't think I've heard him talk about before was the idea that your test code is as important as your source code. And I think our standards are probably not as high when it comes to our test code.
They're improved.
Yeah.
Because of...
You think we're trending that way?
Yeah. One of our recent big projects have taught us that sometimes you go back to maintain a test. Tests are supposedly living specifications. You can't read them because they got nasty. And so refactoring the source code meant refactoring the test, which actually became in and of itself arduous. So we made a point of adding strictures so that we had relaxed before. Naming conventions for things, patterns. When you see something grow to this size, it needs to be broken out. Actually, if the test grows to this size, you are probably in need of refactoring your source class. And maybe the bad-looking tests are going to care of bad source code. And if not, then there should be no problem picking them up. You're just writing a hideous code that could do it better. But yeah, you feel that pain after a while. It's like, the rules used to be, you just do whatever. Just do whatever. And you can make a whole new cut and paste this big inner test class, boom, and make a terrible mess, and you can break all the rules, but it gets the test working today, that's great, until you've replicated that piece of code 6 times, and now cut and paste, no problem, 6 times.
So let's see. Okay, so we know sort of where AO has evolved. What's the standard unit tests code out there? You guys keep it as clean as your source? Do you have higher standards? Same standards? Comments?
What Dave was hitting on, I had an experience this morning where I was testing a class that I thought wasn't doing too much, but I started to see a lot of repetition go in my unit tests. Like a lot of these tests were setting up similar structures, and I had to go through another cycle of duplicating all this stuff again. It's like, wow, this is getting really arduous. And the thought at first was to kind of do some refactorings in my test code to make it more general use. And upon reflecting on it more, what I really noticed was my class it was being sneaky, it was doing too much. If I kind of took some of its responsibilities and factored it out into another class that it was a client of, I could just write one of these tests and test the variability that was giving me so much duplication across all these cases in one place. So I think an observation is when the test code starts to get large, that you do have a design issue. That maybe your tests are getting carried, all this stuff is carried because your class and your test really is having too much responsibility.
Craig's tapping his nose. Smells?
Yeah,
It's a smell.
It's funny though because it's like you have to follow that path because it might not be just your test code that smells. It's a byproduct. And with that TDD approach, that's where I find you. As soon as the tests become uncomfortable, you usually feel it there first. If you're testing first, because you want to try and write a test, and it's not that hard to do. And instead of saying, well, I'll just shortcut this stuff or not think about it too hard, or not worry about testing these one parts, it's usually an idea that you have some refactoring that would make those tests easier to write.
The other thing that I was struck by, this is ironic to ask you to talk about clean code. Patrick's currently working on a project for the World Bank that came over from version 1 from Indonesia, and it's perhaps the uncleanest code on the face of the earth. But the other thing I was struck by is our professional responsibilities to not lie and our professional responsibilities to do professional work could create strategies very consciously along the lines of not being willing to separating your estimates or separating your time or your bids or whatever, your testing from your development. If you just say, well, this is the way we develop, and this is how long it takes, and not say, well, this is how long it will take to write the source, this is how long it will take to test, introducing that difference right there just invites somebody to draw a line and say, squish that part out or don't do it this time. So if we don't do those things, then as professionals, we don't have an opportunity to violate our principles so readily. I think we're getting there in terms of, we've always done that for unit testing, I think we're getting there in terms of automating acceptance tests too, not even talking about it as an optional thing. Steve, go ahead.
I think it's how you code, it's got to be based on an underlying attitude. Either you believe that the best way to do something, the right way to do it in the end is the cheapest way to do it, or you don't. It doesn't matter whether you're writing requirements. There's some developers, I just want to write code. I don't really want to care about how good my architecture looks or how well I handle CM or something like that. The underlying attitude is you do whatever you do, whether it's writing code that's your own thing that nobody else, you don't even check into CM. The best way for you to do it is the same way that you should write your regular code. It would be the same way you write your requirements with a long-term view of, in the end, doing it thoroughly and right is the cheapest way to do it. It's just whether, once you get in the habit of it, it should be harder for you to write code without thinking. It will take you less time to write it well because that's the way you're normally thinking.
Last speaker tonight is Dave Crosby. Dave has a collection of firsts. He's been out of school for about 7 years. He worked at Lockheed Martin before we hired him. He was our first non-apprentice employee. He was the first student I dragged into the exchange program in Sweden when I was a professor. And he was the first one in our office that we recognized with the title Software Craftsman. So, he also likes to talk, and we only have 10 minutes left, so all yours.
Yeah, well, it's okay, you absorbed half my points. Okay, one thing Carl mentioned earlier, which I'm going to talk about briefly, is the one thing that struck me the most about this, I'm going to stand back here because the number of experience reports and various other kinds of papers that weren't necessarily filed with experience reports by large, giant companies, and success stories of theirs or parts of practices. And in fact, the details in most of the stories are very repetitive, surprisingly repetitive, about how they just went down the list and started adopting certain Agile practices. But I was interested in going to them in the first place because it was names like British Telecom, which is an absolutely enormous company, and Google, and two presentations by a team of people from inside Microsoft, so I was very interested to see what kind of things they had to say. And went in and not really knowing what to expect. And what, like our background with adopting Agile is that we just did it from the outset. We were a small company of developers, and we needed a practice that applied directly to what we did, and we were able to adopt it without resistance because there was no one to resist. And we have encouraged our customers and fellow developers of other companies to kind of implement this grassroots stone soup. You don't need all the approval in the world to do these things. You just do them, and the developers will come, they'll start delivering better to managers, and they'll come, and everybody eventually will fall in line. But that's not always the case. And it's very difficult. And so I wanted to know how these giant companies could absorb any sort of Agile practices and really get excited enough about it to come to a conference and share their experiences with other Agile people. Because you don't get an award for it, you don't get any government contracts for it. There's no motivation to do this other than to try to do your job better, produce better products, save money, deliver faster, whatever it is that you're trying to get. So, and because we've heard from many different people, well, that Agile stuff is all fine and good for you group of completely self-directed super nerds. You're all smart, you're all friends, nobody can boss you around, so you can do what you want, you can make anything. So Agile's just your latest thing that you'd like to talk about. We're too big, big wheels turn slowly, we're too big of a company. Well, British Telecom has in its IT staff 14,000 people. Only 6,000 of which are offshore or contractors, but 8,000 people they're trying to kind of start to become a little bit more agile because of various mandates of efficiency increases. British Telecom broke off their IT department to another company called BTXL or something. Oh, I wrote it down, but I lost it. How in the world do you do that? Well, it turns out that the common element to all these things was corporate sponsorship, executive level influence, which is another thing that we thought wouldn't work. We would try to hammer the development process onto your underlings, and they're just going to resent it, just like all the other things you were trying to hammer on. Read this book, get better at developing software, because you suck at it now, and I want you to learn. Go, you change, right? The first thing we need to do is change, and that means you change. But these people were, the people that gave these presentations were managers, not the executives, although one of the presentations, might have been the Microsoft guys had one of their, no, their corporate sponsor vanished, that's why they're private. Or no, it didn't end, it slowed down. At any rate, it was management level who had learned about Scrum and gotten certification to do Scrum and gotten people from ThoughtWorks to come in and help collect individuals from within the company that they thought would be good coaches and kind of train them and pick products and then seed those projects with, the best employees they could find to make sure that they were successful. But it was just interesting to hear about this top-down approach, and they used Scrum as their Agile practice of choice. But when asked by audience members, well, what did you do for, did you do test-driven development, did you do the things that like extreme programming says, oh yeah. For the software development parts, we use XP. And I think they all said that. But they weren't even really focused. They were excited particularly about XP principles. They just took it as rote. Scrum was the thing that allowed us to get, that's what we call the upper management's attention. That's the practices that we employ to spread our coaching out and keep the people at the management level interested in this stuff. Then produce results and bring everybody else in by basically attracting them. They're not trying to go organization-wide. Big companies, that seems like an impossible task. You don't have that many people in your company that are already doing this all at once. British Telecom's biggest challenge was how to kind of cultivate Scrum coaches and disseminate them throughout the company, and they had a big jam analogy about some, raspberry jam. Can be, the more you spread it, the thinner it gets. Anyway, strawberry jam is a good one because strawberry jam has lumps in it. You can't spread the lumps too thin. So they were always keeping their coaches together in pairs. They would do paired coaching, and then they would do coach apprenticeship. And they'd spread that out to several hundred people's worth of teams, I think. They're on like 5 projects right now. It sounded pretty enormous. And they were trying to basically create an entire Agile organization of 8,000 people. They did not say if they'd be back next year to report on that. Microsoft, I thought was fairly interesting because this was the team that works on the internet access applications for second. So the software that stands behind the actual battle servers, the critical, kind of work all the time software, the guy who made the presentation made the comments, that's what makes this product different. Other like Microsoft products that it has to work all the time. So Microsoft paid special attention to getting it to work. And these guys adopted Agile like out of a kit. They just went from not having any sort of Agile background whatsoever to trying to get it all at once. And they even adopted this, what we consider to be edgy practice of high-speed pair churning, or promiscuous pairing, which is taking a short interval, say 90 minutes, and switching pairs every 90 minutes with all of your team members. And half of their development team was not developers. They were traditional QA testing department, tester guys. And they literally took the cats and the dogs, threw them in the same rooms, and you work together and pair churn, and adopt all the other Agile practices with which you're not familiar. Deal with the external departments, which are almost hostile to Agile, and go. And it was some executive at Microsoft who wanted this product to work, and also wanted the data to be collected about this. So these guys collected tons of metrics about all the techniques that they were trying, their velocities, and how much we were accomplishing, given this technique and this technique. So much that these guys actually put 2 papers in. One was about that promiscuous pairing, the other was about the absolute horror of pairing developers and testers together, and how awful it was at first, and then how potent and fluid and powerful they felt at the end of it. There's a lot of interesting details to that one that I've forgotten most of. But another company that was involved was Elsevier. I can't remember the details of them. But they are a reasonably large publishing company, but they're creating a lot of client-facing web application things and things for almost not point of sales, but just new kinds of electronic commerce products that they're not familiar with doing, and have a terrible, traditional heavyweight process that didn't work so well for them. And got their Scrum Masters, they're just hand-picked employees, build teams, make products, one product at a time. I think they're up to 3 at this point. Being successful at delivering ahead of schedule, and being happy enough to let it again to go to Congress to write a paper about it. Google was another interesting one, because they're pretty big in our household name. And one of the things that people hear a lot about from Google is how cool it is working what they do, the processes, and how free they are, and how they only hire the best and the smartest. Everybody has a great time all the time working on Google stuff. When they said we went into this, we were not the big right-wing anti-Agile, skeptical of Agile because it's such a lightweight process that doesn't account for anything, it's not mature, and it doesn't meet the needs of a giant business. Their gripe about it was that extreme programming and Scrum are too heavyweight for what they like to do. These processes are too burdensome. Why do we need to do all that? And this report was done by a guy who was hired as a manager across several projects, and he thought that there was some benefits to be gained by adopting some Agile processes, because though Google, they pride themselves as the best of breed, we're not doing it perfectly, but we're doing it better than everybody else kind of attitude. And being heavily engineered driven, and not so much process oriented. Anybody who thinks that XP is a heavyweight process is surely free of any sort of process at all. This manager was cleverly inserting XP practices without, not XP, XP and Scrum, but more of the process management type practices quietly on the side as time went by, letting people kind of grow into these, enjoying this. Like, we didn't meet the delivery deadlines, we didn't meet this delivery deadline. Why don't we just track our progress? We introduced throwing down charts and various practices. So I caught on. Of course, there were a lot of people who already knew what this was, what was going on, but introduced Agile into an environment which you wouldn't think you'd have a hard time doing it because of this strange existence factor, which is that's too complicated and involved. So I think the one common and exciting aspect of this was with the giant companies, and people with big companies like to say don't work for us, is that all the success is really indicated by measured improvement in product or something that has to matter, because they were doing it in an environment that wasn't going to reward the mere effort of doing it. In fact, an environment that was going to applaud their demise if they failed. So the only way to come out of that happy is to actually have some sort of measurable business improvement that is acknowledged by the people at the very top of the company, saying, yeah, that was great. Because they don't say it, well, like the Microsoft project, I mean, we're given a corporate mandate to do the XP thing and do metrics on it and show us that we've done a good project and keep our internet access running. You know, if they had just done a cool XP experiment and gone through the motions and met all the line items, I don't think their management would allow them to be happy about that, and that they wouldn't come running off and tell us all about it. So it was a different kind of, oh, sorry, the other little side note is that all these big organizations mentioned that when they started to spread this around from an executive level, they found different pockets of the company doing XP in secret. Like they were all coming out. Like, oh, it's safe to talk about this now. Yes, we've been doing this quite a bit actually. and we're, you know, very happy to join up, and even if they're purely XP, to adopt this strong top level thing because of this, you know,
it doesn't matter.
The Marines came to us.
I think that one I heard this summer was at the conference was the Capital One story. And they had tons of data. They had a very organized project manager, and they just studied the heck out of it. They had done Agile plus a lean kind of development. And some interesting stuff happened. Like 22 manager peers got reduced down to 4 because there wasn't any more need for that many people. They had self-managing teams doing this disciplined software development, and they simply didn't need the same level of mid-level management they had before, which can be a threat, obviously, to 18 of those people. But they had significantly faster development, cost reduction, and the same quality. And they had data out the wazoo, the papers and the proceedings. So, since we're a little bit over time, I want to close the formal part of the meeting so people feel free to skedaddle home. And to do that, we'll say thank you to our panel. Thank you very much, panel. And I have a few last things here. I got this book, the user group got this book, Agility and Discipline Made Easy, Practices from Open Up and Raw. And what they were hoping, the publisher was hoping, Addison West family, was hoping that somebody at the user group would like to review it. So I'd be happy to give this book to somebody who makes a commitment to reading it, or most of it, and coming back to the user group and reporting the book. Any takers? Any interest in your own? Steve? Okay, great, thank you. And then, the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, we're going to have to give away some door prizes. So we thought a little bit about this, and I have a list of people who RSVP'd, and that's the pool from which we'll draw. So if you didn't RSVP, I'm sorry, but you're not in the pool. And we need to select those. We didn't have any mechanism for doing this. There's no, you know, look, turn over your chair and there's a number underneath or something like that. So I'm going to ask Sean to give me a hand. You want to do this? Write a program. You should be able to write a little program. So I have the data here. Well, there's your data. These are the email addresses from the XP West Michigan website for people who registered in advance. Okay, that file is attendance.txt. So Sean will craft something up for us here to give away this. So what we're giving away is we have 2 sets of these. I don't think Dave has the other set. This is the proceedings and the CD-ROM with all the contents from the conference. Very nice to have. We have too many in the office. And in case that doesn't interest you, a copy mug. So I think we'll just do a get to pick. Your name gets drawn first, and you can pick of those 3 things, whichever you want. And if you really don't have any interest in that, feel free to just leave it up here, and I will make sure it gets to somebody who is interested in it. Dave, do you have a CD-ROM of that one? Well, we'll find the CD-ROM.
It's upstairs on the desk.
John, should be online.
This is not thorough. He's got to write tests.
Jesse's ill. I don't think Jesse's. Is that our first? I don't think Jesse's here. RSVP to the show. Oh, bad karma. Uh-oh. No random seat.
Did you write a test first?
I don't know. Anybody know that's me? Oh, great, great. Proceedings, document, your rank.
I can get you a CD-ROM too. But
I'll get the CD-ROM. Great.
So we have more than one.
Yep, we have 2 more now. thank you all very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And